All opinions expressed on any program are those of the producer and or persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of DCTV. All producers and guests appearing on programs provide information and opinions based on information they consider to be reliable. DCTV does not affirm the completeness and accuracy. All DCTV members agree to adhere to DCTV's statement of compliance and are participants in a community medium forum where they're exercising their freedom of speech.
Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudes. Welcome to the series on the network of global corporate control. Today's segment is pre-recorded and is called Implementing the Global Currency Reset. Thanks to DCTV, to Carmen Stanley, Program Director, Maurice Jackson, Studio Producer and Director, José Starnes, Audio and Teleprompter. Let's start with some background. We're following in the footsteps of Ferdinand Marcos and José Rizal, who deposited the world's wealth that was formerly held by the Grey Pope, leader of the Grey Jesuit Council, and head of the Ptolemaic Papal bloodline families of the Vatican. At the end of World War II, Marcos and Rizal established the World Bank and International Monetary Fund to administer the world's wealth after 50 years. The chart that you can find in your teleprompter summarizes the world's financial system and Ferdinand Marcos's role as M1. As a whistleblower in the World Bank's legal department, I was strategically placed. That's why the National Defense College handed me their power transition model in 2004. We are now in a coalition of the world's military powers and people to end the corruption in the world's money system. Why the banking cartel is afraid of the power transition model and deleted a tweet. That's because the power transition model shows that the banking cartel is going to lose. What the banking cartel that is run by the bloodline families who have been corrupting our world ever since the previous ice age are trying to hide from you. And we're showing you and telling you what it is. It's a letter dated the 24th of July in 2015, which I wrote to the members of the Development Committee. The global currency reset from the assets in the global debt facility described is under implementation. The action items in the letter of intent will need to be addressed. The proposed draft monetary agreement, which was forwarded to the Tokyo embassies, the historic price of gold, advanced administrative costs approved by the Board of Executive Directors on the 22nd of June 2014, my admittance to the World Bank and International Monetary Fund headquarters and country offices, differentiating and disposing of excess speculative foreign currencies, audit of gold in the global debt facility, and claims of possible thefts, winding down the network of global corporate control and bankruptcy of the banks operating under various jurisdictions, transition arrangements, local currencies, and bailment laws. I'm going to explain these to you later in the program. It's the responsibility of the Development Committee and the Board of Governors of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund to see to it that the transition from fractional reserve fiat currencies to currencies containing gold from the global debt facility, equivalent to the face value of the bill, proceeds transparently and calmly. I look forward to working with you. We're going to go through the agenda items one by one, and I'll tell you what each of these agenda items means. The important thing to realize is that we're all going to work together in implementing these items. because the corruption is so deep, it's going to be challenging to get things right, especially in the beginning. That's why we're going to go back and retrofit what's been done initially, and also why we're going to tackle the corruption in the money first. Two other points. One is that the World Bank's Articles of Agreement are set up for grassroots governance. At the very first meeting of the World Bank Board of Executive Directors in 1946, the United States said that the articles would be interpreted by the other members on the board. And the second point to make, we all have our work cut out for us. Get in a study group so you can work together with the rest of us. And I'm going to read you a comment from the last DCTV archive on YouTube. The 50th comment. You do know that I have to listen 2 or 3 times to get the message. That's because some of this stuff is kind of complicated. I tried to make things in plain English, but sometimes you really do have to think about it and read things a couple of times. Also, electromagnetic weapons are used against us to try to prevent us from figuring these things out and from living our lives the way we want to. And Kimberly Thompson wrote on my Twitter account, "Great interview, Karen, and very informative. I send blessings upon you as you're a true hero in the world of politics and gearing the country on the positive aspects of bringing us back together with our rights, our gold, and stamina to be strong. I'm with you." Well, we're all working on this stuff together. And knowing that all of us are in this together, that's what makes it all possible. One way we know we're ready to implement the global currency reset is because the banking cartel is hoping that we're going to leave implementation to them. That would not be a global currency reset in that case. The whole point of the global currency reset is to get rid of the banking cartel and its corruption. When we wind down the banking cartel and cut off its income, we don't want to have the banking cartel continue its corruption and continue to bother us. Recently, a banking cartel agent named Daryl Fite contacted me and offered to help implement the global currency reset in Indonesia. And as soon as I figured out that he was just an agent of the banking cartel, I told him no thanks. And the way I found that out was because he was talking about cryptocurrencies. Those are from the banking cartel. And I said to him, "You're proposing that the banking cartel implement the global currency reset. Not interested." And so now, if you could stop scrolling, Crochet, I'll talk about the first agenda item. And that's the draft monetary agreements. And I forwarded drafts of those agreements to the embassies in Tokyo. What that is that's going to be an agreement in each country with the mint of the country, and they're going to put the gold that belongs to the people in that country in the currency of the country. And it's going to be, it's not that complicated, but what's really going to be difficult is to make sure that the gold doesn't go missing and that each person in that country is entitled to exchange the paper currency for the currency out of gold. We call it aurum. And we're actually going to do it in 2 steps. First, we're going to have currency that's issued by the country, and then it'll be currency, you can exchange that currency for the currency out of gold. And the reason that we have to do it in 2 steps is because you want to be able to figure out what the relative value of the various currencies are, because there's always going to be international trade. And if you don't figure out what the currency in that country is worth, you won't know how much gold to put in the aurum. And I'll describe what the aurum is. It's like a plastic envelope, and you press the gold very thin, and the amount of gold that goes in that envelope is worth the face amount of the bill. So if a bill is worth a lot of money, then there'll be more gold in it. It's not difficult. The concept is not difficult, but of course, making sure that all the people that are entitled to exchange their currencies for the Oram, that they get what's coming to them. And we're going to have limits on the amount of money that you're allowed to exchange. In the case of the United States, I arbitrarily said that it would be $1 million. And then, of course, we can go back and revisit that. The reason for that is that we don't want, some people were complaining, they said, the people that don't have any money, they're not going to get anything out of the global currency reset. And the number one thing in the global currency reset actually is not the currency out of gold. It's the local currencies, and we'll be talking about that later. But let me talk a little bit about how we're going to get these monetary agreements negotiated. I had written about 3 years ago letters to all of the countries asking them to name the negotiating teams. And actually, 3 countries got back to me. One of the countries was Pakistan. One of the countries was Guyana, and I've forgotten the third country. I can go back in my files. But I wasn't prepared to negotiate those agreements at that time because the rest of the countries are not on board, and I didn't think I was going to be able to deliver. We'll be talking about the audit of gold a little bit later, but there's no sense in signing an agreement when you're not ready to implement it. And so we've put that on hold, but I think we're now getting close to where there are enough countries ready to implement their monetary agreement. And the way that this is going to happen, it's not going to be straightforward either, because the amount of the corruption, you can't just turn things over to a government or even to an NGO, because there is not a single organization that doesn't have a representative of the banking cartel in it now, gumming up the works. We're going to have to rebuild all of our institutions from the get-go, from the grassroots up. And so things are not going to go very quickly. Some things may go faster than others, but we're going to allow the paper currencies to circulate until they're exchanged. And one of the other things you'll see that we're going to be talking about is how to identify. There's much more paper currency than needs to be there. That's because we've had quantitative easing in the United States, and other countries have also just continued to print their paper currencies. It's very easy for the banking cartel to do. They just use the printing press, and then they've got all this currency. And so the way we're going to have currency out of gold exchanged for the other currencies, it's going to be it can't be done just one for one. We're going to first of all have to limit the amount of currency that can be exchanged by any given person, and the agreements are how we're going to regulate all of these things. It's not just going to be a free-for-all or a grab bag. You can think about what the implications of that will be. It'll be total chaos, and we don't want that. We want this to be a peaceful global currency reset. And one of the things that we're all going to be able to look forward to from the very beginning is that some of the inventions that have been there, but the banking cartel has prevented us from using, they're going to come right out. So our lives are going to be a lot different. And of course, when the banking cartel knows that it's getting wound down, it's not going to be able to do some of the things that it's tried to do. So right off the bat, things are going to be improving a lot. As I said, change is always difficult, but when you know from the beginning that there's going to be a a marked improvement. It's not so frightening. Okay, Crusade, if you could take me to the next item. The historic price of gold. Now that's something which is also not that difficult to figure out, but it's going to take a certain amount of math and data, because we're not just going to be talking about the price of gold in one currency, but we're going to be talking about the price of gold for many different currencies. And the only way to do that is to have a basket of goods and services, and then to calculate what the price of that basket of goods and services is in terms of gold. And it should be done in many different in many different countries, and also over an extended period of time. And that's the way it's going to be done. But we have to figure out who's going to do it. I had asked UNCTAD, that's the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, to do that. But as you realize, the United Nations is part of the banking cartel, so they're not willing to do it. We're going to have to find out who's going to make that calculation, and that's one of the tasks for us. Another item in the agenda is advanced administrative costs approved by the board of directors. Well, how are we going to be implementing the global currency reset without being able to get people paid to do the work? Now, the negotiation of the monetary agreements, that's one thing. I can't just do it on my own, flying around from one country to the other. That's going to really create a huge bottleneck. So we're going to have a team of people, and that team is going to have to be paid. One of the questions that we're going to have to decide is whether any of the people in the World Bank are able to do the work on the global currency reset, or whether they're so used to working under the Secretariat, which is really just the banking cartel, that they will not be able to shift their... I worked in the World Bank, and I can tell you that some of these people are adept, but they were not known for their integrity. I have to be very honest. They were not known for their integrity. And so it's going to take some time to get a team that's willing to work for all of us. And of course, when I say for all of us, we have to be transparent and we have to be accountable. And what has to happen on each country is that they have to figure out how to get their country to be accountable. And they won't be able to use their governments, all of the governments, all of them. Every single government is part and parcel of the banking cartel. They've been turned into companies. And so we're not going to be able to use those folks. The people in the countries are going to have to figure out how to get themselves organized. Now, and it's got to be done systematically, and it's got to be done in a way that everybody agrees. So it's not going to be directed from the center. That's not what any country wants. That's really that would be the New World Order, and we're not talking about the New World Order. The banking cartel didn't get its way to have a New World Order. And so the question is, how do we organize ourselves so that we can get rid of the corruption and we can exchange the currency? And the people have got to be starting to think about this, working from the grassroots up. Okay, the next item is my admittance to World Bank and IMF headquarters and country offices. Well, as you see, I don't have to be admitted. I'm working here. And I can send emails, and I can put the issues in front of people. And you can certainly send me emails back. But it will, at some point, be necessary for me to go into the World Bank and IMF, because, as I said, that's the organization that is supposed to be accountable to the collateral accounts and for the implementation of the global currency reset. And one of the other agenda items is differentiating and disposing of excess speculative foreign currencies. What I mean by that is that we're going to have to transition from paper currencies to a different system. And the paper currencies, there are too many of them in just about every single currency. There's much more, and when I say there's too much, what you look at is the amount of economic activity. That's usually the GDP. That's called M1. That's the amount of, and of course you need to have a little more currency than your economic activity, because some people, the money doesn't just stay in circulation. So there are coefficients, but we are just we have a glut of paper currencies, and so we have to decide, how do we figure out which of the paper currencies doesn't count? And one of the ways that we can do that is to go back and see how that the last transactions that somebody who's holding that currency, the last transactions, and if, for example, they earned their money through things that we frown on, like well, you can just imagine what that would be, trafficking. So we're going to have to come up with rules to figure out whether a person is going to be entitled to keep that currency. And that's obviously not going to be an easy thing to do, but we're all going to have to come up with those ideas and figure out how to implement them. Another item is the audit of gold in the global debt facility. I've received an email which told me that it's much more than what I thought. I thought it was 1.7 million metric tons, and then I got a document, somebody emailed it to me, which said that it's actually 200 or 300 times that. Now, I don't know whether that piece of paper that they forwarded me is correct. We're going to have to count our gold. And it's obvious that we're going to need to do that, because we're going to have to keep track of it and prevent people from just taking off with it. Now, one of the things that I've learned is that people are much more honest than we know. Most people, actually. The banking cartel has hidden from us what our characteristics are. We're actually a lot nicer. We enjoy being kind. That's something that gives us a great deal of pleasure. That's what social scientists have discovered. The thing that makes us the happiest and gives us the most pleasure is being kind. So if we understand that people are actually better than we thought they are, it's not going to be all that difficult. But we are going to have to give some thought to how we organize ourselves, and we're going to have an audit of gold. One of the other things that's on the agenda is winding down the network of global corporate control and bankruptcy of the banks. You see, the banks, they owe us all this money, $2 quadrillion. That's a lot of money. Another thing on the agenda, that's transition arrangements and local currencies. That's the way that we're going to have the communities get the grassroots working to do all of the work. That actually should have been at the top of the list. And people should be working together in their communities to have the local currencies issued. Some of the communities already have them, and they can serve as models. Nobody's going to tell a local community or the merchants in that community how they have to work with their local currency. This is up to that community. But there are certainly models, and so that's something that needs to be done. And then the last thing that I wrote down is something called Bailment Laws. What that is that the banking cartel, as I've told you, it's bankrupt. It gets to keep the difference between the cost of the currency, the paper currency, and the face value of the currency. That's just, that's wrong, obviously. But, so that's the only way that